Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
The opinions given in this podcast are our own. They don't reflect the opinions of any of our employers or any outside entities. They are strictly those of our hosts.
And we are continuing to record remotely due to the ongoing pandemic. Things are starting to loosen up where we are in Chicago, but still not enough. So if you're noticing some differences in audio quality, maybe not so great, a little unevenness, it's because of that. So we just appreciate your kindness and flexibility at this time.
And before we get into this episode, we're recording this on day 2 of the riots and protests taking place across the country. And we wanted to just take a second and acknowledge that as part of why we chose the episode we're doing today. But also take a second and acknowledge that we recognize the reasons why the protests are happening. We recognize that people's pain is real, that the systemic oppression that's gone on in our country is real, and that the deaths of innocents is real. And we want to let you all know that we hear you. We hope everyone takes care of their First Amendment rights, but does so in a way that is safe and keeps our first responders safe.
Mm-hmm. So today we're going to be talking about Catching Fire. It's the second Hunger Games movie. We did the first Hunger Games movie in season 2. So if you want to hear the first episode, we did that in season 2. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of different themes today. We're going to talk about trauma reactions between different characters, as well as the systems of oppression that we see here. So those are the things we're going to be talking about today while we discuss Catching Fire.
And we also want to acknowledge that this is a movie that is predominantly white characters. The main character that is battling through trauma reactions and systems of oppression is white. You know, most of the people around her are white. And so we do recognize, we don't want to diminish that, that we're choosing that to talk about instead of maybe something more realistic that's realized happening, like, say, the movie Detroit, you know, or any other numerous movies that are about real life, you know, systems of oppression and rioting done by people of color. We have taken a stance very pointedly on this podcast to discuss pop culture, to discuss works of fiction. So ethically, we are not talking about real people because that is a dicey spot as professionals. So we just wanted to say that up front, that it wasn't in an effort to diminish the real systems that are happening to people of color by talking about a very pretty white girl. You know, we recognize that there's a difference there.
Big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Catching Fire, where are we seeing the trauma reactions?
All over the place.
We start right off in the beginning. We see Katniss looking already kind of depressed and despondent. She has what they call the 1,000-yard stare. We see her like looking through whatever she's looking at when she's out hunting. She's not present. And Jennifer Lawrence, without saying a word, immediately did a great job of embodying that. But where it really becomes super clear is that she's super hyper-vigilant and has an exaggerated startle response to Gale when he comes up.
Yes, in the very first scene, yeah.
In the very first scene. And then right after that, when she draws her bow to hunt the turkeys, but as soon as she looses the arrow, she has a flashback to shooting one of the other tributes.
Yeah. It's a very, like, textbook flashback where instead of seeing the deer, she sees the actor, the person that she shot and killed in the previous movie. And that is, I mean, it can seem a little like, what's what I'm looking for? Like fantastical, but people do have that experience where they think they are seeing something that is not there. Like, that's how intense trauma can be, and that's how imprinted it can be upon your mind, like those experiences. When people say they have flashbacks, they're not just saying that they're kind of remembering what happened to them before, or, you know, anything like that. They're like, can quite literally think that they are experiencing with their eyes and their ears, like something that's actually happening again to them.
That's right. When you see people that have been involved in war and they can't be around fireworks, it's because it's taking them back to hearing artillery and gunfire go off around them, and they're seeing things. They're going back to that moment and thinking that they're there. It's not just images. They're not just things in their mind. They get almost transported there.
And I guess maybe one thing we didn't clarify is when we say trauma reaction, what we mean by that is quite literally how it sounds, like how people are currently reacting to previous or current trauma. And that can both be appropriate and, for lack of a better term, like inappropriate to the situation. And what I mean by that is sometimes in the therapy world, we'll say that person's having a trauma reaction because they're having a reaction to a situation that doesn't make sense. Like, it's too big, like it doesn't match the situation. Like, for instance, if a woman had a history of domestic violence by a man, and then a man kind of like raised their voice slightly to them, you know what I mean? Or not even that, like a man was stern to them, and they were all of a sudden like, you're screaming at me, you're hurting me. Like, that would be an example of a disproportionate trauma reaction, because your body, well, one, you're probably having a flashback, so you feel like you are there. Like I said, like it can feel very real, like that person's yelling at you when they're not. And two, your body's trying to protect you by making you react in such a way that you're under threat to keep you safe. And our bodies are crazy in the sense that our adrenaline system will start going, and that'll inform our mind of what we're going through. So when your heart starts pumping and you're starting to sweat, like it tells your brain like, oh no, girl, you're in danger. And then that forms
That's exactly what my brain tells me.
You're in danger, girl. And then your body reacts to your brain thinking that, and it's like this loop that starts where you're just so freaked out and feel so unsafe, and you feel like you have to either, fight or flight, flight or freeze, which is like the typical ones people think about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think some of the other ways that we see trauma in Katniss, besides a couple of places that you guys already mentioned, is that she very clearly is having nightmares.
Yes.
Ones that she's waking up from in the startle response, and is screaming. So again, being woken up in that place, probably being stuck in the place where she was scared and afraid. And then that's why people often who have PTSD have a lot of trouble with sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And she's also isolating is another one. So
she's a pretty isolated girl to begin with, unfortunately, and I think she just regresses farther into that.
True, but also don't forget, when the first time we meet her, she's already undergone massive trauma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Generational 100%. And losing her father and everybody else in the mine that died at that time.
And I think in the first episode, so if that sounds interesting to you if you're listening, I think in the first episode we talk a lot more about like generational trauma, like the systemic oppression that leads to kind of the shutdown state she's in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. She's a girl that's typically pretty shut down. And then this also affords being more shut down.
And then I think another place that we see her have a trauma reaction is when they're at the games and the birds have the voices of her loved ones, of her sister. And then we see her not only have this, she has to save someone, kind of is what happens. And so she goes running, like without thinking about it. It's like her brain opens up that file and is like, hey girl, we got to go save people. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but we got to go save people. So she goes and does that. But then afterwards we see her on the ground, just shaking with her hands over her ears, after experiencing that intense trauma. And we also see, I guess we're just talking about Katniss first, so I'll just wait.
Okay.
The next person.
But I mean, like Katniss is very much like fight in a lot of ways. I think because she is, probably a natural protector. She's very much like a big sister. You see a lot in the first movie, like how much she takes care of her sister because her mom went into like a catatonic depressed state. But in this movie, like whenever she feels like Peeta's under threat, she goes so quickly to defense. Like when Peeta he gets like electrocuted, like his heart stops, and Finnick is trying to give him mouth to mouth, and her first reaction is she got her, like before she's even thinking, she has her bow and arrow up, ready to like kill Finnick, because she's just very hyper-vigilant, like you were saying, Ben, like very under threat, where she's just like straight to defense, and she catches herself, but for a beat there, she was ready to throw down. And I think that's very much because of also being in the Hunger Games. You know, it's just very much you have to fight first, like think later.
Yeah, so we see Katniss struggle with that, like beat by beat throughout the movie. You know, we start out with seeing her struggling with it when she's in the woods. Kind of, we're getting caught up on where she's been for the past couple of months and what's been going on. And then you see her go through the increased trauma responses as she starts to learn more about Snow's plan. As Snow comes to meet her, and like we see her going through flashbacks and dealing with the nightmares, but as the more Snow gets into her life, the more the plot of the movie develops, where she finds out that Snow is essentially going to start manipulating her or kill everyone she knows, and then finds out that she's going to be selected for the Quarter Quell to have to, after going through all of the parades and all of the speaking engagements, where she has to relive her trauma, being forced to see the faces of people she either killed or saw killed.
Yeah. And you definitely see more of the flight, like after they announce that the Quarter Quells is going to be the previous victors. She runs into the woods to like have what I assume is panic attack. Like, you know, there is some of that where I have to get away, like I have to get out of this house, which is sometimes you hear people when they have panic attacks, it's like they feel suffocated. They want to run into a big space because they feel claustrophobic. They feel like they can't breathe. So they need to get somewhere where they feel like they have literal space to breathe. And you kind of see her do that. But also the woods is her safe space. So it also makes sense that she would want to run there and also get away from her family. I think what's really hard for Katniss, and I think you see that in a lot of the characters actually in this movie, is they have a brave face that they're trying to put on, which I think is sort of also what you're talking about, Ben, when she's feeling more manipulated. Like you have to have sort of almost like a brave face you put on, and then you kind of like shut down and panic in private. So that furthers her isolative behavior.
Right, and we see that, but we also see her hypervigilance exists throughout the film. And if you all haven't heard us mention the term hypervigilance before, basically what hypervigilance means is your body has a vigilance system where you're on a guard about your basic safety constantly. However, when you've been traumatized, you go into this state of hyperarousal where you are constantly in the quest to find threats. And we see that illustrated really well with Katniss throughout the movie. She struggles with shooting Finnick 2 or 3 times and
she does.
Has exaggerated startle response, can't sit still, can't stop looking around. We rarely see her looking comfortable throughout the entire film, and that's a really good depiction of what hypervigilance looks like.
Yeah, she never seems settled. She's always like, what are we going to do? What's the plan? You know, she's always trying to think forward too, as a way to, I don't know, protect herself. Poor thing.
She's never in the moment.
Yeah.
She's always trying to be 2-3 steps ahead. And
thinking, sorry, Ben.
Oh, go ahead.
And just thinking about how I don't even know if we could imagine being in the exact same position. Like she's back in the fucking Hunger Games. And how terrifying that must be. And also she gets traumatized further by watching someone that she cares about killed in front of her before she has to go up the chute when Cinna comes comes to give her a hug, and then they stall her going up so they can show her so Snow can follow through with his threats, and by letting her know that he does know what she's doing, and also that Cinna went against him. But I guess we can talk about that more in the systems of oppression part.
Yeah, so let's get Katniss's traumas. We kind of like touched on them, but let's look at them in order here. We see experiencing flashbacks. We see Snow just showing up at her house, kind of threatening her and letting her know that she's about to be his puppet and she's going to be responsible for playing his game and doing it his way, or he'll kill her family
And also that
in her district.
And also that nowhere is safe.
Correct.
He can come into her house. He can come wherever the fuck he wants. Go ahead, Ben.
No, you're right. That's a major part of the psychological warfare that Snoke or Snow. I keep want to call him Snoke.
Of course, yeah.
Of course I do. Thank you. If anybody knows me, they know I like Star Wars. So
exactly, they'll get it.
They'll get it. They'll favoring me out. I hate both of you.
Yeah.
Anyway. Anyway, but we see. So he comes into her house. He ruins her safe place. He then tells her, like she thinks she's safe back in District 12. She has to leave District 12. And that if she doesn't do what he says on her tour, he'll kill District 12.
Yeah.
So like the one place that she finds refuge in, her home, he destroys her safe zone, which is District 12, thinking she's away from the Capitol, away from the Hunger Games. That's gone. Then she finds out that after going on this tour, she starts to see people get killed in front of her who are starting to riot. We see her face to face.
She's kind of blamed for that too, which is really hardcore.
And she is, because, well, at least she feels the pressure that's because of her, because people are starting to rally around her as a symbol.
Yeah.
And when she is faced with confronting Rue's family and seeing the giant video of Rue in front of her, she's reliving one of the hardest moments for her, because Rue became her surrogate sister.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And faced with seeing the girls, her sisters that look like her and her mom, and the huge just picture of her face, that you see that truly disturbs her.
Well, and even the way they have it set up, like having, like you're describing, but also having her mother and five other siblings,
Something like that.
Also standing in front of the picture of Rue. So even just the way that it's set up is so manipulative. But again, I guess that's systems of oppression. Dang it. I keep veering off the fucking course.
It's hard because she's being traumatized by a system of oppression.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to weave in and out a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think...
Well, hold on. We've got to go through her because the list is exhaustive here. So we're at that. She's seeing people executed in front of her when they start to rebel, when they start to stand up. The thing that she wants to do most but can't, and hasn't really realized herself, that's her arc. Katniss doesn't realize that that's her arc until the last shot of this movie. And you see her face change from victim to warrior. But when we go through this, like, you see that she's being, step by step, each bit of safeness that she had is taken away from her, and she's losing her grip and her control, and that is something that's very important to her. And then she's finding out that she's going to be part of the other Hunger Games by basic math. There's been one victor and
one female victor.
Female victor, and that's her, so she has to go. And then going through all of that process again of the getting to know people, the parade, the show, the evaluations, going through all of that again, and realizing just how small she is and how little control she has. We see every bit of her humanity eroded as Snow takes control and tries to show her just how much of a pawn she is. And
so many of her choices are taken away. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I guess so many of her choices are taken away, and then like you said, like, Cinna is beaten in front of her to death. And
well, it's a continuation of people that she's aligning with, also in the games, people she's trying to protect and that are protecting her dying. I think there's also the compounded trauma of people dying for her, like within the games, even like Johanna screaming at her, like, we were here to protect you. Are you happy now? Because we're doing all this for you. And so then, because I think what I really appreciate about Hunger Games, the whole entire story, which I think is very different than a lot of series like this, is that she is an actual, genuine, reluctant hero. And she remains one the entire time. And so I think what is traumatizing for Katniss is she's getting an identity, too, that she did not ask for, that isn't part of her personality.
Right.
and isn't part of her values or goal systems. Like, she's very micro and they're making her macro. And by that, I mean, like, she only cares about, because of her own trauma, protecting her own and keeping her head down. And that's also being taken away from her along with everything else. Like, she's being forced to be this identity that she has no interest in.
Right. She's being taken into all that. And then she's back on this battlefield, and you're basically playing a video game from hell where not only do you not know what threats you face, let alone just from the environment, but you don't know what the game makers are doing to use technology to create monsters and situations where the air could kill you. You don't know what to trust is safe ever, and you don't know who to trust because you just have to assume everybody wants to kill you.
Because it's like, why wouldn't they? Because everyone's trying to stay alive. Like, it's a losing game.
It is, and also the thing to remember is that when human beings enter a state of stress like that, they also can tend to assume that everyone else thinks like you and has the information you have.
And they're going to hurt you first, so you better hurt them first.
And that is absolutely the mindset she is in. The other characters are a part of a larger plan to cause havoc and get them out and start the real rebellion. But Katniss can't see past her own experience to be trusted even with that plan because she's so impulsive and so reactive to the trauma that she's experienced.
Well, I mean, and also she and Peeta are the youngest contenders as well. So I wonder how much that plays into the factors of it too. Like, I don't know if we've ever said this before. I feel like we probably have. Like, your frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until you're 25, and that's a big part of your impulsivity, your decision making. That's why I always like to make the joke in therapy to parents that, yes, you're right. Your kids are kind of stupider right now. And they're because when they're teenagers, we all are kind of dumber because we're not fully developed yet. And so it is part of the thing too.
So dumb. Teenagers are so dumb.
I love them so much, though.
Arguably, I don't know how old like Finnick and Johanna are, but arguably they are also the only teenagers in this game too. Which
Johanna looks to be about the same age.
Well, no, she's got to have been a few years in the Hunger Games a few years before. Like she wasn't in it with them.
No, she wasn't. And Finnick won at 14, they said.
Oof.
And he looks to be about 28, 30.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say maybe Joanna's the closest, but she's also arguably the next most impulsive. Reckless.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do we want to talk about Johanna next, or do we feel like we want to say anything else about Katniss?
Well, I think what I think is why, like we talked about talking about a bunch of different characters, is I think Katniss is showing the most textbook example of PTSD. She's almost like if you looked at the DSM, you could probably just like go through the criteria and just be like, yep. And the way that she presents, I think, is how, like, even like most, like the mainstream public, would identify as like PTSD. Like, it's very cut and dry.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about this book in particular, because we're revisiting all the people that have won the Hunger Games before, and therefore we're revisiting a lot of people that have been traumatized very significantly, is that the author did a really smart job of showing very different ways that people like live through trauma, like kind of the results of their trauma. Like, it's not just like everyone's just like Katniss. You know what I mean? Like, they all had kind of slightly different ways that they present now because of their trauma.
Right. Absolutely. And we see the characters represent that in such different ways. Like, you see, Peeta is very resilient and Katniss is not.
Well, Peeta, I think, is... Well, Hannah said this while we were watching the movie. Peeta's very empathic. I think he goes more towards people. And I think that you're right, he's very resilient. But also I wonder that too, because he grew up in a household, which I think we talked about in the first episode of this, where he's getting beaten by his mom on the regular. So I think he's learned how to put sort of a persona on for that too. But that also could lean towards his resilience as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we also see, which I think we experienced in the first movie as well, is him having awareness that he kind of is already defeated, right? Like, I'm not going to win, but even my mom wants you to win. And kind of, again, that idea when he gives her the necklace that he had made for her, basically saying, like, nobody needs me. I'm just here to make sure that you're okay.
So he definitely struggles, with feelings of self-worth. Like, when it comes to himself, he's a pretty helpless person, but he can be that for other people, which is also like he's avoiding his own traumas and feelings. But he also has nightmares too. He says that to Katniss, like, I have nightmares too. So he definitely feels that. But I think in talking about this, I think the more interesting presentations that I think aren't as typical, like, we can start there, is like Johanna and Finnick. So with Johanna, it's Johanna, right? Not Joanne.
It's Johanna.
Johanna with an H.
There's an H in there?
Yeah, there is.
Okay. I think what's interesting about her is she's very angry. And I think when we think about people who are traumatized or having, like, PTSD, I didn't think this way before I became a therapist. Like, I don't think of, like, anger as, like, the presentation that comes out. And she's also not just even angry, but she's very antagonistic. She's very provocative and cocky and all those things that which I think we would attribute to someone who's very confident, almost, like, arrogant, versus someone who is traumatized.
Yeah, the actress who played her did a really good job of, like, letting you know, like, there's a secret, like, and you're not in the club. Mm-hmm. Like, there was like something out of her. It wasn't like strutting around, like Finnick strutted around like a peacock, kind of like when you first get to know him. That's what they said about him. They call him a peacock, right? Something
like that, yeah.
I think they call him that in the book.
I'm pretty sure they said it in the movie too. They call him a peacock, but he has a different approach to it. But both of those actors, the one that played Johanna and the one that played Finnick, did a great job of letting you know, like, they have a secret. Finnick's was more in his eyes, and Johanna was more in her snarl. Like, there's a secret she's not letting you part of, and you're never gonna know. But, like, you can't touch me, and I'll make sure I'll hurt you before you can touch me. And that was what her message is.
And that's what I was gonna point out, is that I think some people's reaction to trauma is they make themselves very untouchable. Mm-hmm. And so that can be, some people, especially more often than not with, like, sexual abuse, will maybe put a bunch of weight on. Apologies for my cough. Put a bunch of weight on to be unattractive, like, to other people, and people won't want them, or they, like, won't bathe to make themselves smelly and unattractive and unwashed. And her thing, like, her first scene, she gets butt naked in that elevator in front of everybody, so inappropriate. And that behavior is to put people off. It's to push people away, to make people like, what the fuck's up with you? It's a tactic to keep people at arm's length from you so that you can't get hurt, to, like, be the aggressor first.
Yeah, well, it worked on Katniss. I don't think it worked on Haymitch.
Or Peeta, I would say.
No, those two had a total bro out moment right there.
Yeah, they really did.
But it's still like, she's trying to show in that moment, I'm very capable. I have all my shit together. I'm not even scared of getting naked. Like, you can't even fuck with me.
Oh, absolutely.
It is like a protective shell. Like, that's her way of protecting herself before people can hurt her.
Well, and it makes me think of the part when, after Finnick and Katniss are really traumatized by the birds that have the voices of their loved ones, that she's like, I don't have anybody that I love anymore. They're all gone. So I don't have anything else. So kind of this, like, I want to make sure that I don't have anybody that I love, because I don't want there to be anyone that they could use against me, because I've already experienced that, and it's so difficult that I can't deal with it. So I think you're absolutely right. I think the way that she presents herself very much lets people know that I am in fucking charge, and you aren't allowed to fucking touch me. And if you come near me, I'll fucking kill you. Like, I don't care, and I'll hurt you. And that and we see that so often. If you have anyone in your life who has experienced trauma, that reaction is very, I feel like it actually happens a lot more than we talk about, but I think, again, Brittany, you kind of pointed that out, that like it's not something you knew before you were a therapist, that this is a way that people can kind of almost act out in terms of having trauma, and how I feel like I see that so often, you know, in the clients that I work with.
Because you don't have to be vulnerable too. Like, people just write you off as an asshole,
right?
And you don't have to be vulnerable. I mean, I'm sure we all have had clients who come in the door with this energy because they don't want to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, the most traumatized kids that I worked with, the kids that had the worst story were the most like Johanna. And Jenna Malone is the name of the actress. I had to look that up because I wanted to make sure we give her a shout out, because she just captured that energy so well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, she nailed that I'm untouchable, but I'm broken. But fuck you if you're ever going to get to see that.
Yeah, the cocky energy to the anger.
Mm-hmm.
And she has like righteous anger. Like, she screams when she's being interviewed for the talk show. Like, her telling everyone basically to go fuck themselves. Like, she's very comfortable, for lack of a better term, like, in that anger. Because, like we've talked many times before on this podcast, anger also makes you feel like you're in control, makes you feel like you're doing something, it makes you feel like you have power, even though more often than not, it's a very uncontrollable feeling.
Absolutely.
And so then with Finnick, I think we see the bravado as well, but in a slightly different way. I feel like for Finnick, I mean, we learn later that he's been sex trafficked, basically, post his Hunger Games. So God knows if he was 14 when he won that, fuck. I don't even want to think about how young he was before he started getting trafficked.
Yeah.
You know, into sex work. And he's done the thing where he's kind of created a persona to keep him safe. Like, well, one, he's trying to act as if he has had autonomy in what's happened to him.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, it was my choice to do all these behaviors, when it very much wasn't, because you have no choice in that situation, in the one that he was in. And so, like, adopting this very swarthy, big dick swinging, you know, like really leaning into his attractiveness as well, which you do see people you see people do that as well. Like, we see that I think we see it more with women, you know what I mean? Where they get a lot more provocative in the way that they dress and the way that they act. Like, they get very sexual in their orientation as a way to feel like they're in control as well. Like, I'm in control of this narrative of how I've been treated in the past.
Absolutely. And I think you used a word for him that I think really applies to Finnick more than it does Johanna, which is indispensable. Even though he's a sex slave, basically, he has made himself untouchable because everybody knows that he knows everybody's secrets.
Yeah.
He's part of the club.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he's not. He's part of the club. He knows the Illuminati, and he knows their secrets, and he can take them down.
You're goddamn right he does. You're goddamn right he does.
I don't know why that took me out, the Illuminati.
I think Brittany's like falling over laughing right now because they said Illuminati.
He knows the Illuminati.
Should I say like hashtag
Croft,
pink lipstick Illuminati? The pink lipstick Illuminati for this era, like everybody wearing their weird stylized colorful makeup and stuff in the Capitol. Yeah, because he's in the Capitol only, so he's been working the inner circles, and he's saying like, oh, I haven't traded in anything as common as money for years. I thought that was a fascinating statement.
Mm-hmm. Well, because that doesn't have any power to him,
right? And the idea that anybody who's experienced trauma, not anyone who's experienced trauma, but the people who we're talking about in this story who have experienced trauma, it was all out of their control. So again, any way that we can have control, any narrative that we can have where it feels like we have control of like maybe he feels like he chooses the people that he wants to have sex with because he wants to get their secrets, or like whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I think him having any way.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say the amount of compartmentalizing he does, which is a trauma reaction, which is a trauma defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see his, like, we don't know a lot more about Finnick. We learn a little bit more about him in the next movie, but not really. But, like, it's clear that he has he has that shutdown response after hearing Annie's voice in the birds.
Yeah.
Like, he has that complete, like, he's just completely shut down and devastated and terrified. I think he is just terrified. I think, and he also experiences a very intense loss of someone who took care of him when he was a child. It sounds like when he was a boy, she took care of him, and
she was his mentor.
Yeah, she. Oh, that's right. She was his mentor. She sacrifices herself.
Yeah.
In this story, and he has to watch that happen. I can't imagine. And also knowing that she sacrificed herself for Annie as well. Like, that was, she volunteered immediately so that Annie didn't have to go.
All right, and we see, like, with him, there's like 2 or 3 of those distinct moments where the veil drops. Because, like, he's obviously, this dude is ripped, like, he's a, what is with you, like...
Okay.
That's just, like you say, that guy's ripped.
I don't know.
The size of the dude's traps were, like, up to his ears. He was huge. He looked like a wrestler.
No, it was just...
You just don't understand the code of bros appreciating other bros who have gotten themselves to the promised land of riptitude.
I'm aware.
We understand.
I know you do. I'm just...
Yeah, I know.
But Brittany's face today, anytime I say something that, like, sends Brittany, like, over the edge into, like, lost her shit land. I wish you all could see her face, because she just, like, tilts over like a tree falling over in the wind.
I do.
Anyway, but we see 2 distinct moments where Finnick's veil is dropped, like, and where he, like, shows that he is vulnerable, and there is one thing that he is vulnerable to. It's a lot like when Anakin finds out that, like, Padme's in danger. He's, like, that kind of level. Where
How dare you? How dare
Anakin?
you besmirch the name of Finnick Odair? I pulled his full name out of my ass just there.
Yes, you did.
To speak about Anakin, I'm a baby bitch Skywalker.
Agreed.
Agreed. How dare
not even close.
I have fully ascribed to the Clone Wars version of Anakin, and I know, Brittany, you haven't watched that, so you need to watch that so you understand that no, it's not. It takes, like, the baby back bitch Anakin out of the equation.
It actually.
You know what? If I have to watch,
no, Hannah's supporting me. You hush your mouth
to understand something that should have been covered in the 3 extensive movies that were long as fuck. Then that is a weakness of the storytelling. I shouldn't have to go deep into the canon and watch 8 seasons of an animated series to fully appreciate.
All right, now you hush your mouth here,
like
because
7 hours to figure that out.
You are attacking a beloved part of Star Wars canon. Most Star Wars fans who have watched that could say, I don't give a shit about the prequels, but Clone Wars is awesome. So
okay, I'm not saying the Clone Wars is bad. I'm saying it should be unnecessary.
Very quickly, we're going to end this discussion. Here's the thing. George Lucas is trash. And he is the reason why they had to fucking make Clone Wars. We're not going to talk about it anymore. What were we talking about?
George Lucas made the Clone Wars. And, he was part of that, just so you know.
Yeah,
anyway.
Because he had to.
So, Ben, I assume
anyway, so Finnick, Finnick lost. Yes. He loses his veil because Annie is his kryptonite. Was that better? Annie is his kryptonite. He cannot contain himself when he feels Annie is in danger, and anybody who's become a surrogate for Annie, meaning we see his veil drop when someone close to him, Mag, sacrifices herself, and there's nothing he can do to save her or change her mind, and she just walks into that fog. And then when the Jabberjays mimic Annie's voice, and then the last one is when he thinks Katniss has been the one that is killed when that cannon goes off, because right before she draws the bow on him, and Snow is sitting there saying, "Let it fly."
And you also see his veil drop when he's speaking to Annie through that interview. That's
true.
And he's like, "Who would you like to talk to in the crowd?" And he was like, "I want you to know that I love you, and then I'll see." You know what I mean? Like, his whole affect face changes, like when he's speaking that. Do you think after the Jabber days, when he's hearing Annie's screams and he goes and sits in the water and he's all shut down, do you think he sits in the water because he's trying to ground himself because he's from a water-based district?
Yes.
I thought about that just now and I was like, that's rough stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I absolutely think he's trying to ground himself.
And I'm sure he's really good at pulling his shit together real quick in like a fake way so that he can keep rolling. I mean, that's part of the compartmentalizing.
Absolutely.
Is you figure out ways to like, not necessarily ground, because ground means that you kind of settle in, more like avoid and like push down is more what I think he's probably gotten really masterful at.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
And then, like, you know, speaking of Finnick, we talked about Annie, who he's connected to. She has a very clear movie-ish sort of, you know, reaction via her trauma, whereas as soon as her name gets called, she starts screaming. But it's also alluded to by what Johanna says earlier, and what Katniss says too later, is that she seemed to have a full breakdown post her Hunger Games. Like, she had a full, like, nervous breakdown, like, mental breakdown afterwards.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we don't know a lot about her, actually.
No, we don't. And you don't even know a lot about her in the books, I feel like. So
I think you learn a bit more about her later in Mockingjay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So we see her, and then the other main characters. I feel like we talked about Haymitch a lot in our first episode of Hunger Games, and I don't feel the need to revisit that because he doesn't progress a whole lot. He doesn't get a lot of screen time in this one.
But he's like, he starts drinking immediately. Like, as soon as they announce that they're going to do the quarter quell with previous victors, he immediately gets drunk.
Well, he starts drinking. He drinks the alcohol they used to pour on Gale's back. He puts some of that in his cup.
Buddy. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, Katniss and Peeta both go over to see if he's okay because, you know, of his just track record with that. So he's a clear case of he's dealt with his trauma for years now by avoiding it via alcoholism.
Mm-hmm. Self-medicating.
Mm-hmm. And then there is, I don't even know, if they were given a name, it must have been really quick, but there's the two victors from one of the districts who they kind of just talk about them in the sense that they've become drug addicts. They have a word for it, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, they
like
did
morphlings.
Morphlings, okay.
Yeah.
Morphling, because that's what they call morphine, because that's what Katniss's mom gives to Gale. And she says, and he's morphling, and it's a clear liquid injectable. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume it's a variant of morphine.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And so there's two victors who they've also, similar to Haymitch, they've dealt with their trauma by diving headfirst into substance use.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see them, so they've just wanted to be disconnected due to their trauma. And we don't know anything more about them, but that definitely is another way that people deal with trauma, is by kind of numbing themselves or making it so that they're so disconnected to reality that they don't have to deal with the flashbacks and things because it's too intense. It's too hard to manage, and they don't have other ways or know of other ways to get help. So they seek out self-medicating. I mean, probably also because they were treated with morphine when they came back with whatever injuries they may have had, because that's certainly what they give Katniss. So that could also be a part of it. It's also, a part of our real life
like opioid
crisis.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you see like particular drugs and how they're developed or how they're used by people that are experiencing different types of disorders. Like something like morphine puts you into a state of bliss almost, and often a dreamlike state, and you don't have to feel, you don't have to be present, you don't have to be around for your feelings. And it would make a lot of sense that these particular characters, who their strategy for surviving the Hunger Games was camouflage, and they basically hid until they couldn't anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And they and we see, and I think this probably doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, but we also see that really kind moment where Peeta helps one of them kind of pass away peacefully after they sacrifice themselves in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
for him. She those
For him.
baboons. The baboons are attacking, and then he's about to eat it, and she rushes the baboon and gets killed. Which hashtag fuck baboons. I don't know if you guys have.
I mean, I don't.
That's where we're gonna come away with this episode of strong stance on baboons.
Yeah, I guess.
I have the hottest takes, so my hot take today is fuck baboons.
Yeah, Ben's latest hot take was people that buy plain yogurt. So
yeah, I mean, oof.
there's that on that.
I try to keep it on the lighthearted side. We'll just wait for Hannah to tell us she'll never watch the movie again.
Yeah.
Later.
Absolutely.
And so the last two victors we kind of experience, I guess on the Allies side, if you want to put it like that, is Wirus and Beatty, or like nuts and bolts. And if I remember correctly, more from the book, I think they're called nuts and bolts because they're known for being kind of kooky and eccentric, which I don't know if that was just the personality prior to the Hunger Games or if that was part of them afterwards.
It's also because they that's how they won the Hunger Games. They used they used their intelligence and they of what they know. So he's really good at electrical type things, which we see, and technology, and he's the one who developed the systems that protect the Capitol in some ways. And I think she is something similar. I can't remember exactly what her speciality is, but I do remember that that's part of why. Yeah, that's part of why they're called that as well.
Yeah, I think they're both engineers of some sort.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ben.
Yeah, and you can see Wirus, definitely the woman. That's Wirus, right?
Yes. Yeah.
She, you know, starts to kind of crack a little bit in the games. Like she just starts repeating TikTok. Like her language just gets really.
She hits her head.
Mm-hmm. Oh, TBI.
Yeah, she hit her head. They go to great lengths to show like the back of her head bleeding when something happened. The wave or something hit, and she got a head injury, which is why she gets goofy.
Mm-hmm. And Katniss is helping her clean off, right?
Yeah, she.
I think in the water. Yeah, she takes it in the water. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like her repeating things to herself also might be part of how she soothes herself. If she's, because clearly in the Hunger Games, we see that everybody experiences pretty intense being terrified, being scared for your life for a long period of time. So I feel like she has, that might be one of the ways that she copes with it. And I think that Beatty I feel like he has more of a, I'm going to make a plan. Yeah. Like it's very specific, like pragmatic. I'm not going to react emotionally. And I just have to find a way to get out of this. And I know there's a way to get out of this. I just need to be protected to use my brain long enough to do that. So I think he is kind of really, even I feel like sometimes even when we look at the way that he talks, he has this real specific cadence to the way that he talks. I feel like he very much is very careful with his words and with things that he says, and very succinct, I guess, in the way that he communicates with people too. So I feel like that's kind of part of how we see it with him. I'm not sure if you guys saw something else. No, I think that's a good assessment. I would say like the capitals, the careers as they call them. I mean, we don't see a lot of them other than them being like capital B bad guys. But they definitely take on, I mean, the way they deal with all this stuff, my assumption is just by also having this persona of like the careers, like very strong, almost like machines for this. Right. Well, because they're like soldiers. They're like trained, they're prepared, they volunteer, like they have all of this whole mindset of this is what we're here for. And so I know in the first episode we did about the Hunger Games, we talked a little bit about the career who's at the end of Kane. What'd you say his name was? Kane?
Kano or
Kano?
Is that right?
No, you guys are both wrong. I don't know what it is, but it ain't that. Anyway.
Kato. It's Kato.
Kato. There you go.
Kato Kaelin.
Yeah. So but we see
Kano's Mortal Kombat.
We see him have that realization at the end of the movie where like he thought it was all this ruse of like what he thought it was going to be like. So I think we see the careers very much are in that different kind of mindset of they're being kind of trained and raised and kind of brainwashed in a lot of different ways to believe certain things about the Hunger Games and about the setup of the system.
Right, Gloss. It was one of those.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, that one girl has her teeth sharpened like a shark.
Anabaria.
Yeah, for the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you that the guy who played Gloss, I don't know if you guys had ever watched Blue Mountain State before, but he is hilarious. He is hilarious.
My brother saw that show.
It's a ridiculous show, but he is hilarious in it. And he also auditioned for American Idol.
Okay, that's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. But anyway.
Sounds like you really like him, Ben.
Yeah, I really like him. Really into him.
So I think, does that cover, so we have a wide range of how people can present after having chronic, long-term trauma. Some people use substances, some people adopt a persona, some people have the very typical PTSD presentation that I think we're somewhat familiar with. And then, and some people, they, try to act angry, they get very protective. So we see a wide gamut of presentations, which like I said in the front of this, like I thought was super, reading it as a therapist, I was super impressed with.
Yeah, they did a really good job of that in this movie. And then I think the next thing that we wanted to cover was talking about kind of like the systems of oppression we see, which we've woven in a little bit, but it's important to understand the macro as well as the micro in the Hunger Games, because Suzanne Collins did a really good job of writing the Capitol in as a character, basically. Like the peacekeepers, the overarching story that's happening. You don't really realize it in the first book, but in this one you start to see what is happening, that a rebellion is forming, and that the unrest and the dissatisfaction and anger has been boiling over with the districts for a long time, and that the way that the Capitol has increasingly taken more and paraded and gallivanted with their riches in front of the districts has started to take its toll, and the residents are angry.
Mm-hmm.
And people, Gale at one point says, people want to fight.
Yeah, and Primrose even says, like, we're not living. Like, this isn't living. Like, people, I mean, especially in District 12, which is the most downtrodden, I think, of all the districts, are just like, I mean, it's a continued life of, like, total distress and being under the thumb and never quite getting any of your needs met. You're just, I mean, like, kind of what Primrose was saying, you're not living, you're surviving.
And I think one of the other things we see that Primrose says even to Katniss is she's trying to let Katniss know that she doesn't have to take care of her. She doesn't have to worry about her, even though we know Katniss is absolutely going to do that. But yeah. she kind of says that to her sister, like, we'll be okay. Like, we'll be okay. I want to fight too. And, so I think that's also just kind of interesting, just in terms of how she sees it. I think we also see her have a little bit of a response, which totally makes sense when Katniss is taken. Like, usually they're allowed to say goodbye, and she's not allowed to even do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They take away so much, and that's what you see in these systems of fascism, and why rebellions form. Throughout history, it's always the same pattern. Why riots start, why rebellions start, is when there is voices that are not heard, when there is systematic injustice, when the systems that are supposed to be set up to protect everyone only apply to a few.
Yeah.
And people start to realize it and realize their voice isn't being heard. It's at that point, consistently throughout history, that we see flare-ups and rebellions and riots start to form. And that's what we see starting in this movie. I thought more of that happened in this one than I remembered. And it doesn't. They only show like glimpses of it. It's not until the beginning of the next one, I believe, where they really start to show the impact of Katniss and the Mockingjay.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that has to do with the way that the Quarter Quell ended, where I don't think anybody really understood what happened, or they aren't even clear about it. So I feel like that really I feel like any sense of the Capitol being taken down or being taken over in some capacity. I mean, having all of the communication system that they have set up, so the propaganda that they have, right? Because part of fascism is controlling the media, controlling what people see, which is essentially what the whole tour is about, taking the victors around and trying to make sure that people are reinforced with this idea that the victors are really happy, and they're like darlings of the Capitol because of what happened. So again, kind of showing that people are Brittany, I feel like you said the word and now I can't remember it. Complicit.
Compliant.
Yeah, compliant. Yeah, people how they now look to be complicit in terms of what is happening. Even though we know that the audience knows that Katniss is being threatened, as well as Peeta, like they're all being threatened in terms of, you have to do this, otherwise we're going to kill your family, we're going to get rid of District 12. Like Snow is a masterful fascist leader, I guess.
He is, and he does. The problem is he makes the same mistake that every other fascist in history has made, is that when control starts to slip, he grips harder.
Yes.
And the more, like, every time this happens, people reach a point where your punishments and everything that you're doing are so extreme and excessive that everyone rises up and says, fuck that.
Well, because it brings everyone under a single flag, kind of
Right.
We're fucking over this. And because I think kind of a little bit of what we're seeing now in the real world, but also in the Hunger Games, is there's more of the people that are oppressed than there are the people doing the oppressing. And so when you're taking that gamble, when you tighten your fists, as you said, Ben, because people can start to rally. And I think that's also what they try to be very mindful of in the Hunger Games narrative, is like, as soon as there is a symbol of unity, and in the case of this movie, it's the 3 fingers up, they react so strongly, like those peacekeepers is what they call them, right? In the movie, ironically.
Yeah,
Peacekeepers,
exactly.
like, jump on that one guy immediately and shoot him in the head in front of all the public, because it's still this continued narrative of like, we can scare you into compliance and we can scare you into falling in line. And that's why, I mean, Plutarch has his actual own agenda that's contrary, and so he knows what he's doing. He's
Right.
even more masterful, which is, he's like, make public whippings, you know what I mean? Like, make public punishments, like put people in the street and make people scared. And exactly what you're saying, Ben, it really, like, people can only take that for so long before they choose to rise up.
And also that's part of fascism just in general, public executions, right? And setting it up. And I think that Plutarch, I think you're absolutely right. He knows that will help people support what needs to happen by doing that, even though it's awful. But it's also that idea that sometimes people have to sacrifice, unfortunately, in order for things to be different. And that's, I think, a part of him being game maker. And we see, and how we see Katniss's reaction when she sees Haymitch with Plutarch and Finnick right at the end of the movie, and it's kind of like, what are you doing talking to them? Like, these are the bad guys. What are you doing? Again, her all of her choices. She just has no choices about fucking anything.
Mm-hmm. And I think too with her, and I think this movie does a good job of showing how someone who can unwillingly be a puppet of a fascist state too. Like, Katniss is our hero, you know what I mean? Like, she's our protagonist. And yet in like the first half of this movie, the first half of the book, like, she's playing the game. Like, she is helping the agenda of the oppressive state, because systems of oppression, they make you fear for your life. They make you fear for the life of your loved ones. Like, if you feel unsafe, like, there's a part of you that's like, we'd have to keep on to get along. I mean, it's the famous thing of people saying we're just following orders. It's also, it's just because you're operating out of a shut down form of fear. We're just trying to get along, even though that goes against your morals and your values.
Well, and also that idea of individually, you're more successful individually which is also not true, right? Like that's part of everybody being under one thing instead of I'm going to be this one person who's going to, like, I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to do all the things everybody says I can't, except for and then I will end up kind of in this puppet role of having to do these other things, and feeling alone and feeling like that's the only choice that they have too.
Because I think, and this also ties into the trauma part of it, like after that guy gets shot in the head in front of her at District 11, she goes in the back and she's just like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll be good. And, you know, that I think is more realistic, you know, and maybe any other movie, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or some shit, like she'd be like, we're rising up and we're gonna kick this ass, like after saying something like that. Like, that would be like the hero's flipping point. Whereas with her, she shuts totally down and is like becomes hyper compliant, which I think is more what we see in real life.
Yeah.
With trauma especially is, okay, like abusive states, like people who are in chronic abusive situations, they want it to go away. They can't deal.
That's what they want.
Like, I'll just make it go away.
It's the
and
only thing they
good,
want.
I promise I'll be good. And so that, I'm sure for some people who watch that, like that's really disappointing. You know what I mean? Of Katniss to take that stance. But I think it's a very human, realistic, I think important thing that people saw like within this movie is that that's probably more what happens. And we see that like in real life too. Like, I just want things to calm down. I just want things to settle down, because it's also in terms of systems of oppression, we get brainwashed into thinking or gaslit into thinking that if violence happens, it's our fault for not falling in line, instead of thinking, well, no, it's the people that are trying to reassert the oppression by being extra violent.
Right. Like it's Snow's fault that man was shot. It's not Katniss's fault that she said whatever she said. Like that's not how that goes, but they changed the narrative, right? They changed the narrative. They changed the way that you see yourself and identify yourself in this system when something like that happens. And I think the other thing that we see with Katniss is when she says that to him, she says, just help me get through the tour. And he says to her, this isn't just through the tour, girl. This is for the rest of your life.
He snaps at her and he's like, wake up.
I think that is Haymitch's most important contribution to this movie, other than obviously being part of the subplot that he is, but that realization that you can't ever get out of this. You are their symbol now. That's a critical component.
Absolutely. And I think really such an important realization for Katniss, that this is not that, like, even when she's giving that speech, you know, when she's giving that speech to Gale and is saying those things to Gale about like, I'll be back, like I'm going to go do the tour and then I'll come back and then things will go back to normal. Like everything's going to be back to normal. Like even trying to, again, that idea that people who suffer a lot of trauma are trying to make a narrative that makes sense for them. Like, I only have to do this for a little bit and then I get to come home and be myself, having to convince herself in order to go through what she has to go through to do that. And again, I think that's something that's very human. In terms of people's response to trauma. Like we have to have part of people's survival mode is having to have a narrative that is comfortable, even though it's all uncomfortable, having a narrative that is more comfortable, that helps them either put it in its own separate box or kind of shut down so that they can only see it in a certain light.
Right. Soldiers know when their deployment is over. They know how long they're going to be gone. The police know when they get off shift. The firefighters know what days they're on duty, and then they got 2 days off. And everybody knows what the limits of their contribution are, except the victims. And that is why people riot, is because they know there is no end. And that's what we're seeing right now in our society. There is no end. There is broken promise. There is the illusion that things are fair, and they are not. And the systems that are supposed to be fair are not. And the misrepresentation in defense and inability to even use defense takes a toll on folks when they no longer believe that they have any chance of fair representation in any other way, shape, or form. And at that point, you stop listening, they will speak in the language that you understand most. And throughout human history, there is one language that is understood above all others, and that is violence. And I wish it wasn't true. I really do.
Sure.
And there are other ways to solve things. But the problem is that if you don't listen when people come to you with talking, like, then they're going to change to a language that you do understand. And my wife even like helped me with this today because I was struggling to put my child down who was 2. And she was saying like, go to bed, go to bed, go to bed. And like, she's been saying that, but she's been messing with me. So like, I have a hard time believing her, but she's like, you got to put her in bed when she says that. Otherwise she's going to hit because she doesn't know. And like, that made me think of kind of like what's going on today is much. It's very similar to that. It's a basic human instinct of like, people are saying you fucking enough. And that's what we see in this movie. And that's what we see happening with people. And there's groupthink happening, and you see that like when people start going and letting out emotions that are so deeply stored, and they finally get a chance to let it out, and then mob rule happens and they get some diffusion and responsibility. You see people act in ways they wouldn't normally, and things happen in an out of control fashion. And you think that's what starts to happen throughout the story of the Hunger Games. We only see just the startings of that, the first rumbles, the first person who's willing to stand up, and then everybody starts getting their quiet acts of defiance. That's what scares Snow, is it installs that hope that now someone's going to listen. Maybe people are going to die, but someone's going to listen.
And I don't know if he said it in this one, but I know that he gives a little speech about fear and about how fear is the way that you have to rule. You give them hope, and and then that's what the problem is. So I think that's such a clear statement about systems of oppression.
It's the first one. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think just one other thing that kind of popped into my head, I don't know if you guys will feel like this is accurate or not, but I also feel like that deep-seated trauma that people have, that also they might even surprise themselves in terms of how they react to something like that, especially being in a group. Because I feel like those might be thoughts and feelings and ideas that maybe they've never felt okay unleashing, or they've felt so protective of it. And so also maybe knowing that people who might be in this group who already have trauma or whatever might also have a reaction that is maybe more severe than it would be, or doesn't match their personality, because this is something that has created a narrative for them that they've been struggling with their whole lives.
I think we see that a little bit. I haven't watched the Mockingjay in a while, so I might misquote this, but I think we see that with Katniss when she gives that speech in the 3rd movie. Like, all of a sudden, she's just so angry about something that happens, I think like a bombing or some sort. Like, she visits that she gives a big speech, which is very out of character for her. But she's so angry that she does that. And I think
it's when
what you're saying,
it's when they bomb the hospital. When they bomb the hospital, when she goes to visit the front lines, kind of.
And so I mean, we see it with District 11's where it starts, and I think that's also where we see it in like the 3rd movie as well, is just this like civil unrest. Because also I think too, what's very specific to the Hunger Games is that the capital thrives off of the resources that are very specific to these districts. And so I think what they recognize in that system too is that we actually have power because we hold a resource that they can't get from anywhere else but us. Like, I think with District 11, it's like grain, I think. It's something involving agriculture.
Lumber.
Lumber 7.
Number 7?
Lumber 7 because Johanna has the axe.
That's right. You're
District
right.
11 is farmers. They have those big, like,
oh, yeah.
Like silos.
Silos.
That they top over.
Yeah.
So we see that, and you see, like, when people are in a system of oppression, like, people will rebel at a certain point. Like, there is order necessary to contain human behavior, and a small, few, powerful, organized force can intervene and can control behavior of other people. But when you see it start to not represent the general will of everyone, that's when you see problems. And when the injustices done to the minority are so great that everyone else rises up and says, that's that's wrong.
Mhm.
And in this particular world, we don't see any difference among people based on skin color in the way it's written. We don't see anything like that. Nothing.
Right.
It's all of the stereotyping and everything is done by which district you're from. All of the way the us versus them is created is, instead of by skin color, by income, by any of that, it's all about which district you're from, and that's what you do. And that's it.
It's
That's your whole
almost more
identity.
like
class,
socioeconomic classes.
like a class, like a class system. I was thinking the same thing.
Right. Capital 1 and 2, like 1 and 2 are military. Like the closer you are to the capital, the better you are. The further out you are, the more destitute and more blue collar work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
And probably also more the dangerous work you're doing. Because District 12 the coal mining, and like as we see in the movie, like Katniss's dad like was wiped out in a coal mining. Coal mining is very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Absolutely. And I feel like what part of what we're seeing happen is that idea, moving away from the idea that as the individual that you're only going to succeed if you just bet on yourself. You can't bet on anything else, right? And so, and the change that we see when the systems become so oppressed is everyone feels, again, is under that same flag and is under that same sense of we are humans and we needed to be treated like we're humans, and we're not being treated that way, and we can no longer continue to pretend that it's accurate, that I can have the American dream or whatever. Like I know here in the Hunger Games, this is a little bit different, but maybe like the idea that they can one day be at the Capitol. Like maybe that's
I think that's definitely it.
You know, like one day I can be at the Capitol and I can have money and food and clothes and wear those bananas outfits all the time.
And I wonder too.
Yeah.
Because 75 years into the Hunger Games. So I wonder now if there's been enough generations. Like Mags is old, and she was in the Hunger Games as a child. So I wonder if there's been enough generations now that people are finally recognizing that they're not moving. Like the stations in which they live, they're not upwardly mobile. That, I'm doing the same thing that my grandfather did, my great-grandfather did. And now it's becoming very clear generationally that we are stuck and we aren't moving, and that there's no hope to move upward.
Absolutely.
And that is another point where you see rebellion start to happen, is when an unrest happen, is when people feel like there is no upward mobility.
Yeah.
It's why people quit jobs. It's why people start labor unions. It's why people riot. It's why people fight. I
mean, another good, oh my God, I can't remember his name now. He won all the things for Parasite. What's his name? The director.
Bong Joon-ho, is that right?
I don't think he said it right.
I'm sure I did not say it right.
Joon-ho?
Yeah. Yes, that's his name.
Yes. Well, I mean, he did Parasite, which is way more of a realistic, movie about class. But also like Snowpiercer, which is one of my favorite movies, is a very almost like a very specific, literal almost metaphor for like a class system where it's, the oppressed are the people that are in the stove. And I'd say Snowpiercer, if you want another movie similar to this, which is like a metaphor for classism and uprising, Snowpiercer is also another great one by Bong Joon-ho. I'm going to hate myself for how I'm mispronouncing his name.
So we probably really should have looked it up. Yeah, I know.
Why didn't we talk about him?
I don't know. And also it's that sense of people don't have any other choice. It feels like people don't have any other option anymore. Like you've done the most horrible things. We've experienced the most horrible things, and we can no longer stand on the side and watch this happen, because we've been trying. We've been trying to have, we've been trying to do different things, which is what I think we're seeing right now. We've tried some things. Some things have gone into place. Some things haven't worked. And right now it feels like we don't have any other option for change, especially if we add in the fucking global pandemic, as well as having a president who is a huge piece of shit. Like it's such a
there's that hot take.
It's such a I think people are also feeling just scared and desperate and a little bit hopeless. And I think this is like, there has to be something else. we all want something else, and there has to be something else, and it just feels like this is the only way that we can get that, because we've tried other ways and we've done other things, and the fucking the line hasn't moved, and the line's gotta fucking move, man. It's gotta fucking move.
And I think too, with the Hunger Games kind of upward mobility piece, and I think very much what we're seeing in today's world, and I think probably also when like we were definitely dealing in real slavery, you know, a few generations ago, is that you don't get any cookies for being the good version of whatever the oppressed person is. Like me getting along and being a good slave, being a good Black person, being a good District 11, like District 12, isn't also getting us any farther up the ladder. Maybe we'll have like a false sense of that.
Sure.
But getting along it within the system isn't rewarding us either.
Yeah.
And so what other hope do we have? You know what I mean? And when you start feeling that hopeless piece, why not rebel?
Why not? So as far as treatment goes, do we have any thoughts on where we go? Because I can feel like we kind of covered a lot of that with talking about where we see the realistic problems and connecting that to today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the treatment that we see for these characters, from my point of view, honestly, at this point, is that it's an incomplete picture, and it's a societal problem that has met the end of its life cycle and has been abused, and that the Thomas Jefferson quote of every now and again the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed with the blood of tyrants and patriots. That's the point that this story is at.
That's pretty metal.
I mean, I'm wearing a Metallica shirt right now and play like in metal bands.
Wearing a
so
Peeta Kaio shirt. She's also very metal. I think maybe what could be good to talk about with treatment is some grounding techniques, or maybe some things you can do, or anyone can do, or the characters in the movie could do if they came into our office and they were having these heightened PTSD symptoms where like your heart's racing, you can't sleep, like where basically your body is getting away from you. I know in the work that I do, a lot of CBT and DBT skills, if you're familiar with that, cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, there's a lot of good practical concrete skills that you can learn through those techniques. There's a lot of good workbooks that are very concrete, where you can literally just read through it and learn skills and how you can apply them to use them forward. Because I think with PTSD and with more of these like trauma anxiety reactions, a lot of what's helpful is not so much like the talk. I mean, it's good to do the talk therapy where you process it through and talk it, but a lot of what's really helpful is how in the moment, what do I do literally when I'm having these experiences? And so, and I think we don't talk about either with PTSD is dissociation, which is when you aren't sure where you are. And I think that's what we see with maybe Finnick, but we'll talk about that when we do part 3 of Hunger Games. You know, I think we see a lot of dissociation there, but grounding helps with that. And so what can be really helpful is grounding back into your body. A way to do that could be holding an ice cube in your hand that brings you into a very physical sensation into your body. And so it can help ground your mind and kind of shock your system. You can also like put a cold washcloth on the back of your neck. It's when you see people splash their face with cold water. Like that's the kind of that part of that strategy. Another good thing too is if like, especially when you wake up or if when you have a flashback and your heart's going, is you can kind of like that cycle that I was talking about earlier, you can kind of trick that cycle by like starting, like do jumping jacks or run a lap around the house, like do like something really physical, because then you kind of trick your mind into thinking that your heart's racing and you're sweating because you're doing physical activity, not because you're panicking. And it can kind of break up that cycle of thinking so that you can sort of start to calm down. It's a way to trick your nervous system a bit.
Yeah, it's the way that I talk to clients about it, because grounding techniques is something I talk to every single client I work with about, because in order to, part of helping someone is giving them coping skills to help manage whenever they're experiencing any kind of symptoms. So I feel like one of the things I talk to them about is how using a grounding technique can help stop the physiological response that your body is having, because it's trying to protect you. It thinks that you are in danger. And so doing something that again, uses the more pragmatic part of our mind, is what can kind of help distract us long enough for our body to realize we're not in trouble. We're not in trouble. And so I think the things that you mentioned are good. Also, there's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing you can...
I think 1 thing you can taste.
Is it,
you don't want to go around licking stuff.
No, don't be ridiculous. That's not what I mean. But I mean, it's the senses. It's the senses. Yeah.
You do this.
Hashtag advice from Brittany.
I can never fucking remember all of them. But anyway, I have a there's another one that I've been talking to a lot of people about that's been really helpful lately, is counting backwards from 100 in sevens. That's been something that's helpful. Yeah, exactly. So I have a grounding technique sheet from therapistaid.com that I will post, that I'll make sure that we post because it has, in my experience, it has the best set of different grounding techniques, because everybody has different ones. But it has the best options. Like, it has body options. It has the list option, which we see Jessica Jones do. And she experiences you list facts. And then,
which Katniss does in the 3rd book.
Yep. And then you have one where you kind of are grounded to the exact experience that you're having. So like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that's part of that. Yeah. So I'll see if we can't post that. And I kind of when I talk to clients about it, it's about finding 2 or 3 that work really well for you. Yeah. I have grounding techniques that I use for taking public transportation. I have rocks and crystals that I have in my pockets, and I hold on to them and to remind myself that I'm safe when I'm feeling anxious riding the public transit here in Chicago. And so that's for that. I use breathing for feeling anxious before sessions. So it's like finding things that you can do in the moment is so important in terms of managing any mental health symptoms, but especially PTSD, because like you said, it's that arousal period that we want to help people be able to feel like they can do something about that, and that they don't have to experience the entire episode to do something about it for themselves, to kind of, again, stop that physiological response that their body is having.
And I think another good one too is ABCs of mindfulness. It's where you pick a category and then you try to do the whole alphabet in that category, like fruit, and then you do apples, bananas, cantaloupe, dragon fruit. Like, you really have to think, because the point is that you're trying to ground yourself into something different. You're trying to preoccupy your mind and then also, I think, at least for me, when I start to do that, my breathing will start to naturally slow, because I'm trying to think through like what I'm talking about. And so that's a really good one as well. And you can use that over and over again.
And I think, and just one more quick thing to add in, the other thing is that if you look up grounding techniques on the internet, there's a couple of different articles that say you can call a friend or you can take a shower. And those are great options, but here's the thing. If you're having a panic attack on the bus, you can't do any of that shit. So I talk to people about finding something that you can do that nobody has to know about. So one of the other ones, that's why I hold on to the rocks. Like, nobody has any fucking idea I got rocks in my pockets. Well, now everybody that listens to us does. Or I do the breathing where I breathe in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts. And I do that until I feel like my body is regulated. That's another one that I use that, again, nobody has to know about. There's these things that we can do so that we don't have to, that idea of, well, what if I'm in this situation, right? If somebody's hyper-vigilant, what am I going to do in this situation? What am I going to do when I have a flashback? And it's like, here is a thing that nobody has to know that you're doing to help you be able to do that. So, Ben, I'm sure you have some things to add here. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
That's okay. It's good to hear your voice this consistently. And here you provide such good content for our listeners, because you are a good therapist and people deserve to hear the things that you have to say.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's very sweet.
Good feedback is you can have good feedback. It's okay. You have this look of like, I need to refute that, and you do not.
No, I do not.
The things that I think I want to highlight, because you two nailed it so well, is that remembering that when you're experiencing a traumatic situation, like so many are right now with COVID and the riots happening, is to remember that that is not the time where you need to solve or heal the trauma at that point, your only mission, the only thing you need to do is get through. The time to reprocess it and to deal with it and to pick yourself up and pick the pieces up and reform yourself into the version you want to be can happen when the traumatic situation is over. It cannot happen while it's ongoing. All you have to do is you have to find ways to use coping skills to get through, and it's okay to do that. The thing that's been like going around, so many people posting all these things about ways we're supposed to be handling this quarantines and stay home orders and curfews, we should be doing this productive stuff. No, we're going through collective traumas, and the real thing you just need to do is focus on surviving so that you can get yourself back into order when things are safe to do so. And at that point, you can engage in trauma treatment or trauma work on your own. The most important component, the only component that matters in trauma, is pairing the distressing memory with a calm body. And I talk about EMDR all the time, but it's not the only way to do it. Any number of trauma therapists can do that, but the basic mechanic that works is pairing distressing stimuli with a calm body. And that is only something that happens when the trauma is over. So where we find our characters in this movie, that's not possible for them. They're in an ongoing trauma. They can't do that. They have to use the techniques to survive. The brief moments you get to drink water, to notice the sun, to sit in the water. All of those little things that we see people doing through the movie are the things that people can do to get themselves through.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Ben. I think that's a really important thing for people to hear, for sure.
Because if we don't feel safe, like, that's like the Maslow's hierarchy as well.
Correct. So let's move into final thoughts here. What are your final thoughts on Catching Fire?
I love it. I love this movie. I love this book series. I think I probably said this in the first one when we did it, and I'll probably talk about this in the next one. It's such a good representation of trauma. It's such a good representation of mental health. It's such a just like an accurate representation in a way that I like respected so much while I was reading it, and that I continued every time I see it. Even though I've done a lot more like work in the field since the first time I read it. I think I read the books when I was in grad school, and it impresses me even more now that I know more, which I think says a lot about the books as well. And so I'll watch it 1,000 times again. I feel like every time I start watching it, I want to watch all of them in a row. So I couldn't do that today, but wish I could have. But I think it's just such a beautiful representation of how, in order to be strong, you don't have to. I guess that strength is all different kinds of things, and I think my biggest bugaboo with most like pieces of work, like television, movies, TV shows, whatever, is that when the bad thing's over, we all go back to normal, or we all can just move through it. Like, we're only in distress while the thing that's distressing is happening. And this book series does such a good job of showing that there is no going back after something bad happens. Like, maybe you can realign and grow, and like the post-traumatic growth and stuff like that, but you're never going to be the same. And also what this book series also does demonstrate in this movie as well is that you can't move past an event when the event is the system, and it's chronic and it's constant. And what that creates within people and within society. I mean, I think it's beautifully written, and beautifully applied into a movie.
All right, Hannah, you want to go next, or you want me to go?
You can go next.
All right. So I am with Brittany. I have very much loved these movies since I first encountered them, since I first heard about the story. I was already interested. They're just so wonderfully written, and Susan Collins was, or Suzanne, right? Suzanne Collins?
Suzanne Collins.
Yeah, she's a screenwriter. So like, she wrote these books as like a screenwriter, and they play like a movie in your mind. And then when I saw the movies, they played like I saw them. So like the filmmakers and everybody that worked on them, like, almost everything about the movie, like, played in my mind the same way it played played on the screen the same way it played in my mind in the books. And I love them. I love them, watching them every time. I also was finishing up grad school when the first one came, or when these came out, and then was out in the field for a couple years when the series concluded, but figuring out and the intricacies that go along with doing trauma therapy and seeing how they all apply so masterfully through this story, the people's trauma stories and the healing and the pain that stays with you forever, and the way that's represented, and that you don't have to be strong in the face of it, that it's okay to break down, it's okay to show moments of not wanting to be there, to not want to do that, to not do that, and still rise above it, and for your pain to be real and acknowledged and not shied away from, I think is beautifully done in these stories. And I also have the same feeling. I told my wife when we watched this today that, like, okay, I just want to watch the others now. So I love these, and I think Jennifer Lawrence does a phenomenal job along with the rest of the cast. Everyone does such a great job, but she really earned her star with these.
For sure.
I feel like she does such a good job at showing physical aspects of trauma that can't be written. You know, and so I think so I love Hunger Games. I read the book so fast that I think things that happen in the first book actually happen in the second or the third book. I get reminded about this by my sisters a lot, actually, because we've all read the books, and so we talk about them sometimes. So I love the books. I'm very excited. Suzanne Collins actually wrote like a prequel of like 80 years before Hunger Games that gives, I think, maybe the original oppression and the original system that broke down, that created the Capitol. So yeah, Panem. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I need to order it pretty soon. But
It just came out this month.
yeah, it did. Yeah. It came out like 2 weeks ago or something. So I'm excited to read that, to see if I'm just hopeful to know more about the story.
I think it's about snow.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Yeah.
I think it's about his rising. Shit. My computer's gonna die in a minute.
That's part of us working remotely, is we're all in our own little corners of the world on our own little computers.
Well, I didn't feel like sitting at my desk, because I sat at my desk to see clients now.
Right, and despite that we all probably live like 3 miles from each other or less, it feels like an hour to move amongst the stops, even though it's really not that far.
Yeah, agreed. So, so I don't think I'll ever, son of a bitch. There we go. Sorry.
Getting some behind the scenes reactions.
I don't think I'll ever stop watching these movies or telling people to read the books. I love them a lot.
Yeah.
I think they just do a beautiful job. I think it's written beautifully. I think it's acted really well. And I think that, watching it today, after all the things that are happening and getting the alert on our phones about the curfew, the CTA, the curfews that's been put in place to help decrease the riots, but most likely will just not do that at all. And the CTA stuff that will mostly affect people of color, which I think is just heartbreaking, besides all the other things that we're seeing. So it was both difficult to watch the movie today, but also felt really nice to know that even though this is horrible what we're going through right now, and it's horrible what's happening in the story just as much as it is where we are right now, that we can move towards change. It's unfortunate that it's happening in the way that it's happening, but I don't know that it could happen in any other way. And I think you can say the same for what Panem is looking at and the experience that the people are having there. So, so I love the Hunger Games series. I love her as a writer. I love the movies. I love the actors. I'm probably going to watch the other 2 movies tonight. I need a little bit of hope. I need a little bit of hope today.
You got like 6 hours of to get through to the hope part.
I
have to say, like, one thing that I thought of, like, that while watching this is I forgot how powerful Philip Seymour Hoffman was as an actor, and how, like, the quiet presence he carried, but the gravitas he had, and it made me miss like thinking about the movies he would be in, because there was one point in time where he was rumored to play Penguin in a Batman movie, and I was very, very excited for that to have happened, and it just didn't. It didn't, because he was another instance of someone who tragically lost their life to depression and drug abuse.
Yeah.
You good? You done talking about it, Ben?
Yep.
Putting finger guns at us over the camera. Anyway, well, this is probably one of the more charged episodes we've done. So if it brings up any feelings within you, if you have any opinions or feedback you'd like to share with us about what we've talked about today, which we definitely welcome. We are all up for growth any way we can be. You can feel free to message us at our email is the best way to message us if you want us to give you like back and forth interaction. Sometimes people leave reviews that feel like they're asking us questions, and we appreciate leaving reviews, but we can't respond to them, unfortunately. So we're at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We're also at Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, Popcorn Psychology. On Twitter, we're at popcorn_psych. You can also message us at any of those 3 platforms, and we're pretty responsive. And I'm never going to say not leave us a review. We appreciate those as well. It helps people find us. It helps us, be seen by people who might not find us as well. So we do appreciate the reviews we are getting. We are seeing more and more. We read them. We share them with each other. So when you leave us a review, we are very aware of them. So we do appreciate those a bunch. But yeah, we will, we're all going to fight and see another day. We'll see you there.